introduce our presenter. You're looking puzzled. You said you were going to do that.
Well, I'm going to let you get into the details. Strazzante, folks. He's going to talk.
Guys, good seeing you all. Thanks so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. I'm a lifelong Chicagoan. I grew up on the far southeast side. I really wasn't interested in photography as a kid, but I was interested in sports. And my dad would take me to various Bears and White Sox games. And at one point I started grabbing his camera. But I think my major influences were the photographers of Sports Illustrated, because I subscribed to Sports Illustrated, and on one half of my room I had, all these great photos by Neil Leifer and Walter Yost Jr. and Rich Clarkson, and the other side was my Farrah Fawcett posters. So that was like the kind of divide. I had my sports side of my mind and my teenage side of my mind. And my dad was a tire dealer in the south side of Chicago. I was supposed to take over the family business, so I went to college to be a business major. And halfway through college, I just kind of fell into photography. I saw a gallery of work by a Tribune photographer named Paul Giroux, and a light bulb went off in my head, and I just kind of went from there. I got a part-time job at a small paper in the southeast side of Chicago, the Daily Calumet, and I basically learned on the job. And I would not be a photographer nowadays if it wasn't for my love of sports. Now, currently, it's just one of the hats that I wear every day. I do sports, I do news, features, business assignments, portraits. I love doing street photography with my iPhone on my free time. But I do love doing sports, and I'm not like a huge action photographer, although it is a huge part of my job. So I'm going to get my action photos out of the way first. So I'm lucky enough to have the best photo equipment that the Tribune just gives me, and I get to sit courtside. So I have a lot of advantages, and I do, I've been doing it for a long time, so like anything, the more you photograph, the more you kind of get better at it. But there obviously is, a certain craft to it, and as a photographer, I'm looking for significant plays. I'm looking for the game-winning touchdown. I'm looking for the player of the game. I get plenty of really good photos, but if it doesn't match the story in the newspaper, then I'm kind of, I have to start over. So, every photo I take is not usually eligible for publication, only because it's not a story. Like if I shoot a Bears game and the Bears are winning 21-0 at halftime, and I have all these great photos of them scoring touchdowns, and they end up losing, my first half is just a total waste. We don't even publish them. So it's all, kind of story driven. And so you have to almost kind of overshoot at times to kind of make sure you get the story right. And the one thing I'm proud of is that I've been shooting long enough where I used to actually manually focus my camera, so I feel like I've earned the right to autofocus, and so, but, autofocus is such a major advantage now. It's, back in the day with, just hand, the follow focus or whatever, it was more of a challenge, but now, the autofocus definitely takes care of a lot of it, but it also kind of takes away sometimes as much as it gives you. But yeah, this is one of the reasons I love sports photography, is because it just freezes down these moments that just go by in a flash on video or on TV, and usually in a play like this, the athlete's eyes will be closed. It's usually at peak action sometimes when there's going to be a collision, the athlete will close their eyes, which for me kind of ruins the photo. But this one I was lucky enough to have this kind of very peaceful look. This is Sidney Rice of the Vikings, and it almost looks like he's just making direct eye contact. It's just really kind of interesting. I've shot Devin Hester a ton. And so now that he just left the Bears, I resurrected a lot of my old photos and did a blog post on my Chicago Tribune blog. And this was one of my favorites because the guy he's jumping over is a punter for Denver named Todd Sauerbrunn, I'm sorry, Todd Sauerbrunn. And Todd was on the Bears before this, and during this week he was talking crap about Hester, how Hester wasn't going to return any touchdowns, and he just happened to return one and jumped right over him. It was fantastic. And so this was for me, to make this photo was cool, but the even cooler thing was The Denver Post and the Rocky Mountain News both had photographers there, and both those papers ran my photo as lead art, because they didn't have the play. And so that's always, my goal is to get the significant play of the game, and it's really nice when things come your way. It's another autofocus photo from the White Sox. I tend to, I have, I shoot like a typical football game or typical White Sox game. I'll have a 400 millimeter f2.8 lens, and then I'll have a 70 to 200 zoom on another body, and then a wide angle on another body. And so I'm usually, using those combination of three lenses. When I'm shooting hockey or basketball, I won't use the long lens. So it's, sometimes it's kind of a lot of juggling going on, and I'm working on some really nice carpal tunnel syndrome here too from carrying all these cameras, but just part of the job. This is from a Cubs game a couple years ago, and the bat went out of the hand of the batter, and I just kind of fouled it into the stands, and I just really kind of loved looking at the faces, and especially the kid with the death grip on the cheeseburger in the front row there. Just like, I'm not letting go of that. And everyone is paying attention to the bat except for the mom of the girl who got hit in the head with it. So, But now, and the thing of, like the PC-ness of the world, like now the Cubs have erected like a 12-foot plastic barrier that goes above there, and it's like, taking all the fun out of it for me. So. But mostly, action is a big part of my job, but I love sports just because it's such a big part of people's lives, and and there's so much emotion to it, and there's so much, interaction between people, and I really love moments like this. It was a Golden Gloves tournament, and a father was training his son, and this was just a little prayer before the bout. And then this was, probably the saddest thing I've ever seen in my life. This was the Bartman game, and this family came from Kansas. It was the boys' first Cubs game, and they came to see the Cubs, go to the World Series, and it was just, and I don't know if you see the Bartman documentary, the 30 for 30 on ESPN. Oh, it's like the most depressing thing, I've ever seen in my life. So what's that?
Yeah, I saw it. It was the ESPN 30 for 30 at Pension Bell.
Yep.
I saw it was on ESPN Classic the other night.
Yeah, it's, I'm not a Cub hater, even though I'm a White Sox fan. My dad's a big Cub fan, but man, I couldn't, just watching that just made me ill. It was just unbelievable, that situation. This was when I worked in Joliet. We covered the local college. I think this is Joliet Junior College, and so there you have a little more access. When you work for a small paper, you can kind of get into people's lives more because they see you all the time, and you build up a relationship throughout the season. So when the season ends, you can just say, hey Chuck, can I follow you up to your room afterwards? And and the guy's like, cool. And so like these are the photos that don't happen a lot, but I really like when sports kind of bleeds its way into everyday life. I'm not a big portrait photographer at all, but this was a photo I did for a story we did when the Olympics were still a possibility for Chicago. And we kind of interviewed, me and a reporter went to Washington Park on the south side where they were going to build the stadium for the opening ceremony, and just kind of talked to the athletes there who were going to kind of lose out on their Sunday playground for about 10 years. But obviously you all know how that turned out, so there's no need to do that. And this was 2005 when the White Sox won the World Series on the field. And what I like doing is there's probably 150 other members of the media on the field, but I love trying to make my photographs seem like I was the only one there. And this was definitely a situation where I was able to do that. And one of the easiest things to do is just to get low. I think that's when you shoot sports photography, the closer to the ground you are, I think the better the photographs are going to be. I always shoot from a kneeling or sitting position. And then even in general, I love shooting from a low position because it cleans up the backgrounds much nicer than having some kind of distracting person or TV camera or something in the background. So you'll always find me crouching or sitting or laying or holding my camera down low because I just really think it's a much more pleasing angle. This was the Bears game this year when they lost to the Packers near the end of the game. This one went viral on the web. A lot of Packer fans enjoyed having this as their wallpaper. This was a Miami Heat Chicago Bulls game a couple years ago. And so like when I shoot a game, so like this was, I would say, a 7 p.m. start in Chicago, 8 o'clock in Miami. You know, I have to, after the first quarter, usually I'll have to run and send a couple photos and then go back out to the court. And then at halftime, I run back in and I transmit a couple more photos. And then after the game, I'll do that. Or like at a Bears game, we're constantly, got to get photos in, got to get photos in. It's not like the good old days where I would shoot my 10 rolls of film and then go process them. And now it's just like, we need photos like constantly. You know, and the bigger the event, the more photos they need. And like I'm shooting the White Sox opener on Monday, they're always like, okay, you got to cradle point photos in the first inning, which, you know, we have this little device. I don't know if you guys, I'm not a technical photographer at all, but it just kind of plugs into my camera and you can transmit the photos right back to the newspaper without having to go to my laptop. But, you know, it's, you know, there's just like, that was like one of the things that, I love the internet and I love the democratization of photography in the way that you can spread your photography around the world instantly, but it also sometimes, you know, they want photos before I even shoot anything, and it's just kind of like, you know, what do you got? Well, the game hasn't even started yet, you know, so anyways. This was the national championship game where Notre Dame just totally laid an egg against Alabama. So I concentrate on Alabama. And a lot of times between the action at Bulls games, we'll just sit there and not do much, but occasionally I'll photograph some of the entertainment that goes on. And this was just some dunk troupe who the guy missed a dunk, and I just kind of enjoyed the fact that he was just kind of hanging around in the air without a head. I don't know. Well, this past season, Alex Rodriguez of the Yankees, he was suspended for 211 games or something, and he came back, and his first game was against the White Sox, and he appealed. So this was the first series in Chicago, and it was a pretty big circus. And so every time he would come to the plate, he would you know, get this reaction. And since I was an art major in college, after I decided to become a photographer, you know, a lot of my influences are more in the artist world than photographer world, so Norman Rockwell or Monet, you know, so this was, you know, definitely for me, whenever I can get a photograph that's kind of reminiscent of a painting. There's a Norman Rockwell photograph of a baseball game, and you know, so I like, you know, sometimes playing with the art in my photography, even though no one notices except me. Once again, you know, getting low. This kid was probably 4'7", you know, but just getting down underneath his hat and just trying to get inside the moment. This was the Jackie Robinson West Little League team. They played Michigan to go to the Little League World Series in Indianapolis, and they lost. And it was crazy. Like the Michigan had a pitcher that was like 6'5", and then there was this little 4'7" kid batting. But you know, once again, I'm there to exploit little kids' dreams for my gain when they start to cry. But I just love, you know, when, you know, like this little one that they made for each of the players with their numbers. It just, you know, when things all come together, and it just kind of is really nice. This was Halloween night last year, and Derrick Rose, one of the 10 games he played, he hit the game-winning shot. And so I photographed him being interviewed, and I followed him off the court and then down to the locker room. And we usually never photograph down there, but all of a sudden, this guy, his name is actually Mikey, he was dressed for Halloween, and he's a friend of one of the Pritzkers, and they always sit kind of courtside. So they're always kind of down underneath the stands. And all of a sudden, Rose is walking this way, and I see this guy coming that way, and I'm like, this is awesome. And then all of a sudden, they just kind of nonchalantly just kind of tapped hands, and it was just kind of one of those really bizarre, weird moments that'll never happen again. But yeah, let me go back to that one real quick. But the thing about the way it is now is that, so we have one of our sports staffers, if we send in a photo that she thinks is cool, she'll tweet it out immediately on her Twitter account. And so we kind of go back and forth about the fact that, she's basically taking our photographs and sending them out unattributed into the world. So this was a case where this photo went viral, and it was on the Keith Olbermann show. And the crazy thing was, first, Keith Olbermann said, "Oh, here's a photo that Amanda Kashubi sent out." But she's the only. She just kind of sent it out. It's like it's not her photograph. And then they did put an attribution on it, but they put Twitter/Scott Strazzante. Like I work for Twitter. It's just like, and that's like what's really crazy now about you lose control of your photograph so quickly on the web, and I'm not. It's not like I have the ability to watermark anything, because I'm just like getting photos in as quick as I can, and the Tribune usually doesn't just kind of send their photos out. But that's where it gets kind of squirrely sometimes with our work, is that people see it and they think they can steal it, and then they can just kind of do it their own. So I would say maybe once or twice a year I'll get a photo that goes viral, and it's always a headache, and it's always more good than you even want. This is the Chicago Marathon from a couple years ago, just screwing around with slow shutter speeds. This was, I think, probably about a second exposure. I'm over on Grand Avenue. Thanks. So this is what I really love about photography, is like things happen that you have no idea are going to happen. And this is such an easy photograph to make. Just set the camera on the ground, and when these runners go by, their feet are there long enough. And I've seen a couple photos just like this that are, I think it's just really interesting. Yeah, this one I called "There's a bear shit in the woods." So this was at Bears training camp a couple years ago. This is Gabe Karimi, who was a rookie at the time. He's not on the team any longer. And training camp is really boring. It's usually being glorified headshots. You're basically there just to shoot the new players, and really nothing ever happens. But Gabe, in the middle of practice once, he just walked into the crowd. I'm like, "Where's he going?" So I went with the wide angle and followed him. And I saw him go in the porta potty. I'm like, "This is awesome." And so there was no one around, and I just kind of stood there and waited. And then all of a sudden, people started coming up, and then he came out. And I took 2 frames, and he looked at me and said, "Oh shit!" It's just and I just kind of tiptoed away. These are for your Jay Cutler haters out there. 666. And when a pigeon lands at center ice at the United Center, you can't beat that. Yeah. And then you sitting there, you kind of get these bad thoughts, like you hope it gets hit with a puck or something. It's like, come on, get the action closer. And so a lot of, I shoot so many sports that I just kind of at times, you just are just looking for something different, just looking for a different angle. This was when I worked in Joliet. And I would occasionally, have a friend of mine who was a pilot fly me around in his Cessna above the Chicagoland Speedway, and just kind of photograph stuff. And like I said, I'm not technical at all, so I don't do remote cameras. I don't really set up anything, except for just kind of looking through my eyes. So this was at the United States swimming trials before one of the Olympics that I photographed, and it was just a big picture window, like underneath the pool. So you would sign up and you'd get to shoot one race underneath the pool, and it was just, just anything to find a different angle. And once again, I was just shooting the people going by, and then all of a sudden when you edit, you're like, "Oh, that's cool. I like how the toes are curled up," and so many of my photographs are kind of just happen, and you just find them in the editing process and are excited about them. And this was the Super Bowl when the Bears lost. Devin Hester returned the opening kickoff, so when the Colts were celebrating, he just kind of went out there and watched. And we had 4 photographers there. 3 were on the field. I had a mid-level, like a upper deck angle about at midfield. And so I photographed this And then like 2 seconds later, Nuccio D'Annunzio from the Tribune ran around with his wide angle and got underneath him and made this beautiful photo that ran like all on the front page. And I was like, ah, Nuccio. This was a little cherry picking on my side. This was in 2008, the White Sox had to win like 3 games in a row to make the playoffs. They had to beat Detroit and then Cleveland and then Minnesota. So this was one of those 3 games at the Cell. And my job was to do fan features. So I was wandering around the upper deck doing fan features, and the bases were loaded and Alexi Ramirez was at the plate. And I'm like, well, I'll shoot 1 pitch at this at bat. And so I shot it and he hit a grand slam and it ended up being lead art. And I feel bad like that because when I'm not part of a team at the paper, I don't want to like be cherry picking on someone else's job or trying to do what they're supposed to do. So I felt a little bit bad about this one, but not too much when it ran 6 columns. That was nice. But so. This is the Ryder Cup from a couple years ago. This is the only rapids in Illinois. It's in the Vermilion River, which is kind of near Starved Rock. And some years there's no water. There's not enough water to even have rapids. But this one year there was. And so I just kind of got sent down on a Sunday to make some features for a story on it. And just perched on a rock, and like everyone who came by wiped out. This is where I live, in the middle of nowhere. This is Yorkville, Illinois, and this is actually when my son was playing Pee Wee football, and he's one of the offensive linemen somewhere in there. But it's like just this fantastic football field that overlooks these cornfields and just nothing but sky. This is from the Bears game this year. They got delayed by the weather when there was the tornado in Washington, Illinois. So just kind of trying to make anything you can. Once they called the delay, they were telling the photographers we had to leave the field, and we're just like, I don't want to leave the field, And they're like, you gotta leave the field. So it was just kind of like, so I just kind of had to get people coming off the field. Once again, bad weather makes good photos. This was at Wrigley after a storm. Wrigley Field is such a beautiful place to photograph. So I'm always on the always on the lookout for, once again, anything different, anything, that's kind of not your everyday. And 100th anniversary of Wrigley this year, so I think it's going to be a lot of good stuff going on out there. This is back to the Super Bowl after the game. There was a fog delay at the Cell last year. I think as I get older, I shoot wider. I used to be really tight is right. And, now I think I'm just I really enjoy the context of moments. And snowstorms are always great. So I do a lot of street photography with my iPhone, so I'll now occasionally work it into my daily routine. Most of the time I'll do it just when I'm killing time before and after a game. But this was at spring training last year. It was picture day, so I just kind of found this area with some cool background, and every White Sox player came by, I just kind of did this kind of diptych front and back photo. This was at the Big Ten tournament a couple weeks ago in Indianapolis. The Indiana cheerleaders practicing and not doing a very good job of it. There's a center field at the Cell. Sometimes when I take this photograph, I'm like, oh, that's pretty good. I better take one with my real camera. The bosses are going to get mad. Outside of Wrigley, obviously. So this was part of I did this thing called Neighborhood Watch, where I took my iPhone and went around to different neighborhoods, and this was part of the Lakeview story. This is Derek Jeter on one of his visits to the cell. There's another one from the Big Ten tournament. Pre-game snack by the inflatable bear. And then right after I got the iPhone, I wanted to shoot everything with the iPhone, and it was just like, I was just like, every assignment, oh, new iPhone. So I ended up doing this little story on Maywood Park. My grandmother and grandfather lived in Maywood, so as a kid I would go to Maywood Park a lot, and it's pretty run down now and kind of sad. They race every Thursday and Friday night, so the gist of my story was I'm going to do winter at Maywood Park. But it was one of our warm winters, and it only was winter one night the entire time, which now I look back on as wonderful days. But but this is just kind of wandering around Maywood Park, just looking for different things. And I also had this horrific filter I was using, this film combination that had these all jagged edges, and I absolutely hate it. I've tried to crop as much out of it as I can, but there's still, you'll see some of these horrible little things on the bottom, and my bad. But I shoot with Hipstamatic, which super slow shutter speed. I don't have any control of the settings, which I actually like, because I've been controlling my cameras for 25 years, and I really love the lack of control. So even though a lot of photos are blurry, I still enjoy the surprise of it. And there's also a lag in the processing, so it's almost it's the closest I can get to shooting film and not be shooting film. But sometimes it's nice, sometimes it's sharp and it looks good. One night it snowed. It was like, woohoo! But there's a ton of characters, and not many of them want to be photographed either, so it was nice having the iPhone just kind of sneaking up on people. But the horse racing industry is dying along with newspapers and a lot of other things, so it's, I'm not sure how much longer it's going to be there. Now they're just using slot machines to try to prop it up, and OTBs. So I think part of it, even though I'm doing this just for my own entertainment's sake, part of it too is as a historical document, and probably doing it on an iPhone is not the best way to preserve history, but
Better than nothing.
Yeah, exactly. But there's definitely a different look to it. The compression of the iPhone I really enjoy as compared to my big camera. So now this I think more kind of gets into what I love to do in sports photography. I love just kind of sport is life and culture, and this was a story that I did on a girl named Maricela Rodriguez who lived in Joliet, and she was a boxer, and so this was her prom, and she was having her sister photograph her, and Mary didn't want her photo taken, and so she was kind of slouching, and her sister said, "Mary, come on, just act natural." And the first thing she did was put her fist up, and so it was fun following her around. So after I was done with that story, I was like, well, I need to find other stuff to work on, that's more kind of like this. And right about that time, this was back in the glory days of the Tribune, when we would travel all over the place. And I got sent down to Tuscaloosa, Alabama to do a story on this coal mining disaster that happened shortly after 9/11. And so I spent about a month in Alabama with the Blevins family, and there really wasn't much going on. So we went to a lot of Brandon, the boy, baseball games with his grandmother Wanda and his dad Brandon also. And so after the games, we would go to Dairy Queen afterwards. It was a tradition. And so one night, Brandon had struck out twice, and so his dad was giving him little, batting lessons in the parking lot of the Dairy Queen. And it was just like, for me, it was like this great, pure American sports moment. And so when I got back to the paper, I started trying to think of a way I could kind of do this more often. So I decided to propose this photo column, this weekly photo column in the Tribune called Heart and Soul, and where I would show up at a high school randomly at a random sporting event, and I would try to find one moment and then write a copy block about that moment. And so I did that for 2 years, and mostly it was just amazing. You would show up places and there'd be crazy things like, a porta potty used as a ticket booth, and so it's just like there would always be something that was interesting that kind of would kind of move forward. This was just the homecoming king who was a soccer player instead of a football player down in Wilmington. This was fencing practice in the cafeteria. But it was like stuff that we never ever shoot for the newspaper, and this was a gymnast who was trying out for the diving team. This was actually shot with like this. So this was, when was this shot? 2008 maybe, 2007. And it was with a disposable underwater point and shoot camera, and I just kind of held it under the water as she was diving, and 2 of the 36 frames actually had her in it, and this was one of them, which ended up actually turning out fairly nicely. There's a daughter of a math teacher watching her softball game in Oak Forest. Plus it gets me out in the suburbs, which I rarely ever shoot because it's so boring, but there is stuff occasionally that goes on. This guy was great. I show up and there's this guy who's like totally sunburnt except for all these 6s on his body. And like he said, oh yeah, I had my sister put these tinfoil 6s on me and I laid on the deck for 3 hours. And I'm like, okay, thank you. So I did that for 2 years, and it kind of got to be a drag. I would show up at these high schools unannounced, and like, hi, I'd have to like sell myself every single time. I'm from the Tribune, I'm doing this column called Heart and Soul, and blah, 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 blah. And people were cool about it, but it was just hard like starting from scratch all the time. So I decided, well, this year maybe I can follow one team. And so I proposed another photo column called The Season, where I would photograph a team in the fall, a team in the winter, and a team in the spring. And when I'd worked in Joliet for 3 years before I got to the Tribune, and one of the sports writers there's wife was the volleyball coach at Joliet Catholic. So I knew that if I asked her for access to the team for the entire year, she'd be cool with it. And so she said yes, and the paper said yes. And so I did my typical coverage of the team going through their season, but the one thing that I really kind of liked was before every game they would do this pre-visualization or this visualization exercise before the match, just to kind of, they would lay on their back and they'd put their feet up on the wall and just kind of think about what they were going to be doing during the upcoming match. And so each high school they would go to, there would be a little different kind of mood to it or a different place and stuff like that. And so it became kind of a fun little kind of thing to break things up. Was everywhere we would go, I would always be kind of looking to see where they were going to do their pre-visualization. But I think I was doing a blog at the time, so I think they kind of caught on. So I think they were trying to find kind of crazy places to do it, and so even though I didn't say anything, they would like always, every week it'd be some really kind of strange, odd place they would go and stick their legs up. But they were a lot of fun, and they had a girl, Kelly Murphy, who was the best player in the nation on the team, but they ended up having a lot of injuries, and they ended up losing in the sectional final, I think, at the end of the year. But I ended up, I don't even know where the photographs are from the rest of this. All I have is the ones of the visualization, which I really enjoyed. And then the next team I followed the Fenger High School boys basketball team on the south side of Chicago, and they just hired a new coach, Lamont Nelson, I'm sorry. And so, that was a really fun 3 months also. And just having access to a Chicago public school and being able to kind of come and go was really cool too. And it was like this really awesome old school, and the locker room was in the basement, and they would, you know, play upstairs on the 3rd floor. So there were just so many visual possibilities to it. And this was at one of the tournaments they were at. They were really bad. I think they ended up being like 3-22 or something for the year, but this was one of the games that they won. And then the last one I did was Evanston girls soccer, and followed them throughout their season. And I think for the volleyball team and for the girls soccer team, I made like huge mistakes. Like at the end of the banquet, I was like, "Oh, I love you guys all. You guys are great. Thank you. And if any of you get married, I'll shoot your wedding for free." And I'm like, "Yeah, all right, yeah." So I have like, you know, like 50 girls out there who someday are going to like come knocking on my door. "Hey, you remember when you told me you'd shoot my wedding for free?" So anyways, so these are just, you know, kind of, you know, just random little moments that happen. This was sleepover night, they were movie night, one of the girls' houses. And this is always tricky. It's like, you know, I knock on the door and there's this middle-aged man. "Hi, I'm here to photograph your daughter's slumber party." "Okay. Can I see some form of ID, please?" I think there's a little bit more than those. Thanks. But the thing is, when you shoot every match of an entire season, you know, there's so many great things that happen that you're there for just because you're there all the time. And it's just such, you know, it's such a great way to cover something. You know, because usually I'll show up for one match a year and maybe for, you know, and you just miss all the great things. But it's kind of cool. Like most of these girls I'm still Facebook friends with, and like I think they're all graduated from college now, and so it's nice to kind of, you know, follow along. And, you know, this was a sandwich making volunteer they did for some homeless people. So it's senior night. I like the sky, as you can tell, a lot of sky photos. And this was the last year they had grass on the field. They were replacing with AstroTurf. So after the last match of the year, the girls all laid on the grass and were hugging the grass. It was really cute. And then I think they played New Trier in the super sectional. And anytime you play New Trier, you're going to lose. You know, so this was their last match of the year. And then there was like a really kind of sweet moment at the end where the senior captain kind of found the junior who was going to be captain next year, and they had this really nice moment on the field. You know, and so I really like when stories come kind of full circle and they have a nice ending to them. And then I kind of tried to do a little bit this last year. There's a school in Aurora called Mooseheart, and they have like 112 students. It's, you know, for lack of a better term, it's a school for orphans, and that's what at least it used to be. Now, I guess, I don't know what would the PC term be. I'm not even sure. Yeah, so they brought in a bunch of kids from South Sudan, and by chance, you know, one of them was 7'1", one was 6'10", one was 6'7", and they never played basketball before. They were volleyball players, but they went on the basketball team. And so there was this big controversy where they got suspended because they said they were illegally recruiting them, but then they were allowed to play. And so this was, you know, they would go play these farm teams who had no one like bigger than 5'10", and it would be so amazing. Every game, like the players would come out of the locker room and there'd be this 7'1" guy coming, and these kids would be like, you know, and the final score would be 70-12, you know, it was just like, and so, but then the crazy thing was they ended up losing in the sectional to Chicagoland Jewish. It was like this really bizarre scene. So there were all these like tall Sudanese players, and they lost a bunch of, you know, guys with yarmulkes on and stuff. It was like really kind of strange. And then this year, the 3 guys were seniors, and they ended up winning state a couple weeks ago, but I didn't get to go. But it was it was cool. And they're really nice guys. And here's Akeem, the 7'1" guy, comparing hand sizes with a 5-year-old boy. It's just unbelievable. But that's the stuff I really like doing, and it's kind of the excuse. And so this year I've been shooting a lot of high school basketball, and I was at a couple of the state tournaments. This was the girls' state tournament in Bloomington. This is Montini from Lombard after they won the state title. And then Whitney Young, they won both the girls and boys titles. So this was them during the finals. And celebrating. And this was in Peoria last weekend. I was down for the Class 3A and 4A. Which is always looking for little details, just little. And of course, this has no chance of ever running in the newspaper, but it's, I still like shooting it, and I will put it on my blog if I can. So many great reactions. He had a technical foul called on him. So this was like super controversial. So this was Jalen Brunson. He's the son of a former Bulls player. And he was playing Whitney Young in the semifinal game. And he ended up scoring 56 points in the game, and they lost, and it was a state record. And there was at one point during the the game, where he made a three-pointer, but the referee called it off and said it wasn't a good basket. So he turned around and he was like really mad, and he was like really fast, and me and a still photographer from Peoria, shooting at like 10 frames a second, had this whole series of the reaction where it starts out with his hands like this, and he comes down, and then he has his middle fingers out to his waist. And so we didn't see the play happen in live action. It was so fast, I didn't realize his middle fingers were extended. No one reacted to it, no one knew it happened, there was no technical foul, nothing. So as we were editing the pictures later, Ron from Peoria was on one side of the room and I was on the other. I saw my frame and I'm like, wow, I think his middle fingers are extended. I'm like, I don't remember that happening. It's like, I think that was probably unintentional, or he was just mad at himself. And it looks like he's flipping people off. And I just felt it was improper for me, or reckless, to send it into the newspaper. But Ron sent in his photo. And Ron's a great guy, and he's a great shooter, and I really like him, but the one mistake I think he made was he put in his caption that Jalen Brunson makes a gesture to the Whitney Young fans. So he basically said that this guy was flipping off his opponent's students. And so they put the photo online, and it just went crazy on Twitter, and it became this huge controversy, and Jalen almost got suspended for the third place game and stuff like that. And so then I did a blog post on Sunday about it, just kind of defending the kid, saying that I thought that he really wasn't doing what people said he was doing and stuff, and that became controversial. And so it was just crazy how high school sports are people put so much time and energy into dissecting them and stuff like that. But we ended up running this photo in the paper a couple days later with a story on the controversy.
Was that where you ran the full?
Yeah, so then I ended up running 20 frames in a row on my blog of his reactions and stuff. And then these are the photos I like. It's like, I don't know why. It really has nothing about anything. I just love, I don't know. There's just I like weird photos now. Maybe because I've been shooting it for so long that I just kind of like these kind of odd, strange moments.
They're levitating.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I watched so many Teletubbies episodes with my kids when they were younger that I enjoyed this. Anyone know who is this? This Poe, or anyone know your Teletubbies names? What are their names? Lala? Anyone? Anyone? No? Okay. And then this was after Whitney Young won. And this is like, always, I don't know how much sporting events you guys shoot, but the game will end and you'll have your wide angle and everyone will run on the floor like crazy, you'll be running on the floor like crazy. It's just, and like getting something in focus is just a miracle sometimes. It's just like. And then this kid, he was like one of the bench warmers. He was a real little kid, and they kind of did a mosh pit for him. It was pretty funny. Sorry, I have a lot of photographs. I hope you don't mind. So one of my cooler, funner assignments was after the Blackhawks won the Stanley Cup in 2010. I knew that of the tradition that each player who wins the Stanley Cup gets to spend 24 hours with the Stanley Cup wherever they want. And there's 4 guys from the Hockey Hall of Fame in Toronto called the Keepers of the Cup. And usually they travel in pairs, and they deliver the Stanley Cup to the players. And they're with it the entire day with the players. And so I knew even before the Blackhawks won the Stanley Cup that if they did, I wanted to do this story because I had seen other people do it. So before the season was even over, and I know people would be like, hockey fans would be like, that's a jinx, you can't talk about the Stanley Cup before they win it or whatever. But anyways, I talked to my editors, and they were lukewarm on the idea, of me traveling the world with the Stanley Cup. But as things progressed, I ended up kind of like, well, I could go on this one trip and kind of go on that one trip, and I'm going to be on vacation here. I'm going to, and so I ended up kind of going with maybe 12 or 13 different trips with the Stanley Cup. And this was Patrick Kane in Buffalo with Mike Bolt, the keeper of the cup, kind of unveiling it in the driveway of his parents' home. And this was Dustin Byfuglien up in his home in Roseau, Minnesota, letting his dog drink beer out of the Stanley Cup. And this is Howie, one of the keepers of the cup, cleaning it. And they don't get the cup inscribed until the entire summer's over, but that was when the Blackhawks won it in '61. And so each time a band is filled with teams who won it, they remove the top band and they put that in the Hockey Hall of Fame. So I think the names are only on it for about 40 years or so, which of course is pretty good. This was in Lombard. This was the assistant equipment manager, had a party in his backyard, and it got a little rambunctious, so the keeper of the cup moved it into his laundry room. And these were the ones where I was just like, thank you. I loved, once again, random stuff like this. Never expected to happen. This was up in Winnipeg with Jonathan Toews before a parade. This was Dave Boland in Toronto. I'm at a party, and once again, this is 90% of the time when the Stanley Cup is anywhere, it's just people taking pictures with it, and it's just really long, tiresome days. There's only a very small amount of time where something interesting is actually happening. But this one worked out great because it was this cool pool, and once again, I just kind of did a time exposure, and people's flashes on their camera were lighting up the Stanley Cup, so I was kind of borrowing their strobes. And this was one where it kind of worked out nice with Boland and his girlfriend holding the cup up. This is the Stanley Cup being strapped in the back of an SUV by Cheveldayoff's his last name. I can't remember his first name. He was the assistant general manager. This is in Barrington, I believe. This is in the middle of Sweden with Niklas Hjalmarsson. And also, it'd be halfway through each day, too, people would just totally lose interest in it, too, and the cup would just kind of sit there and people would go about their day, and I always found that fascinating, too. Yeah. And this is Jonathan Toews on a public bus in Winnipeg. And Toews had this expression for 2 straight days, he never smiled, he just And this was back at the party in Lombard with the assistant equipment manager. This was a male woman in Toronto. Hockey players are so down to earth. Most of their parents still live in the original houses that they grew up in. This is, Dave Boland, had just signed a $3 million a year contract, and his parents still live in this little teeny house. And then this was every airport would be the same thing where the keepers of the cup would go up to the desk. This was in Gothenburg, Sweden, and they were on their way to Finland. And they like roll this big case up, and the lady will always say, "No, you can't bring that on the plane. That's too big," you know.
It has its own-
Yeah, exactly. And then
Yeah.
they end up like having to get their manager come out, and then they okay it. And, oh, that's a Stanley Cup. Right? You can put that on. But of course, they say that in Swedish, and I have no idea they're actually saying that.
That's amazing.
And this was Kane again at Niagara Falls.
You want to send it over there.
Yeah. Back up with Buffalo in a parade in Roseau, Minnesota. Buffalo again. But I like doing stories where there's like it's the same but different. Like in this, you know, this is like such an easy story to shoot because it's just you just stay by the cup and things are going to happen. You don't really have to look too hard. And then at some point during the summer, the White Sox had all the teams that had won major championships in the last 25 years bring their trophies out. No Cubs there, sorry guys. I don't know where they're. Yeah, they'll get there eventually. And John McDonough, the president, brought it to a hospital in Park Ridge, and that was really sweet. And then finally, when the season started, Jonathan Taves skated it out in front of the fans. So when 2013 came around and the Blackhawks won again, I knew, well, there's no way they're going to let me do this story again. So we ended up like barely covering it at all. But I was in Boston for the 17 seconds of glory. The challenging thing about shooting the Stanley Cup is like when we shoot at the Blackhawks games, we have like holes that are in the glass that we shoot through, so you don't get any distortion. But by the time you get to the Stanley Cup, newspapers are really low on the rung of organization, so you have to shoot through the glass, which is really difficult because if you shoot at any angle, it's really distorted. But luckily, when the Blackhawks scored the tying and go-ahead goal in the last minute of Game 6, you know, some of my frames were sharp looking. So this was Bolin celebrating. And then this was horrifying. Steve Rosenblum, one of our writers, wrote a long article about the last 17 seconds, or the 17 seconds between the two goals that they scored in Game 6. And so they decided to run every photo I took from, you know, throughout that entire span, which means that I had like 80% out of focus, horribly composed photos like in the Tribune. And it was just like, this is a nightmare, you know? And it was like they ran it kind of in strips, and it was just like, oh, I was so horrified, but people liked it. I don't know why, maybe, you know, but I was just like, ugh, just having your entire take published was just, ugh. Still have nightmares about it. And then this was one of the photos I took after the game out on the ice, and this ended up being like the full front page of the Tribune, which was cool, because then they like make it into t-shirts and beach towels and mugs and all these kind of souvenir things, so that was kind of fun. Yeah, I get nothing out of it, of course, but that's all right. I got to go for free.
You get the t-shirt.
Yeah, I had to buy my own, but. So one of the reasons I went to the Tribune was because I wanted to shoot an Olympics, and it was like a dream of mine. And so 2004, I got to shoot the Athens Olympics. And leading up to that, I did a story on this guy here, Jihad Hamdan, who was a Palestinian American who was trying to make the Palestine wrestling team, but there was no Palestine wrestling team. He kind of would have been in the entire team. But he wasn't good enough to make the US team. So I ended up following him through his whole series of trying to make the team. And we ended up going to Bulgaria for a qualifier. And where else did we go? We went to Slovakia. It was crazy. You know, me and Jihad traveling all over Eastern Europe. And it was really fun. But there's just a couple photos of when we were in Aspen. And we were out on a snowshoe hike. And he was training. And now Jihad's son's actually a wrestler at Marist High School in Chicago. And he just, I think, came third in states, so his son's definitely taken over the legacy of his dad. So now I'm just going to show you some Olympic photos, and that's all I'll show you. So these are from Athens, Greece in 2004. Olympics are amazing. It's 17 days of 20-hour days, and just, every photo you make is better than any sports photo you've ever made before. And it's just, you get to a point where you're like, if I see one more celebration, I'm going to throw up. If there's one more athlete wrapped in the American flag, I'm going to poke my eyes out. And it's just, but it's, it is still amazing, and it's a lot of fun. And there's so many really kind of, if you're looking, there's unique photos to be made, but not many. Because usually, like if you're shooting swimming, there's like 5 rows, and there's like 50 to 100 photographers in each row, and we're all stacked up, and it's really difficult to get something that's unique and different. But everything is beautifully lit, and the backgrounds are all nice, and they let you climb around in the rafters, for unknown reasons without any safety equipment, but whatever. And this was like 2004, so I don't even think I'm not sure what kind of phone that is, but they were probably the first selfie ever. It's kayaking. And this was a big significant moment. This is Rulon Gardner. He'd won gold medal unexpectedly in Sydney in 2000. And then in 2004, he wasn't even supposed to medal, and he ended up winning a bronze. And one of the traditions that wrestlers have is when they retire, after their last match, they'll go sit at the middle of the mat, they'll take their shoes off and leave them in the mat and walk off. And so I never knew that had happened, but I shot the wrestling qualifiers in Indianapolis before this, and I totally missed this great photo because the guy had done that. And so it was really nice to kind of be looking for that. And another photographer from Getty made this image, and it was like named one of the top 20 sports images of the first half of, the last half of whatever it was. And I was just like, ah. But anyways, so we had like the same exact photo, and his was like named this amazing photo. But sometimes that's what happens. And this is is it Misty May, I don't know, one of the volleyballers. And then then after the Olympics, they had a parade for the gymnasts. What were their names? The brothers. Dude's on there somewhere. Anyways, my eyes are no good. Anyways, there were the 2 brothers from like Sheboygan, Wisconsin or someplace. They had a little parade, and it was really cool because no one gave a shit up there. Like, oh yeah, it's the boys, So thought it was kind of funny. And then this was in Torino. This is the one winter games I shot, which is enough. It's very difficult to shoot a winter game when it's actually winter. Sochi probably would have been easy because it was more summer there than winter, but if you go to the Olympics, this is the cliche photo you have to make. Every photographer makes this photo, and so it's part of the law, I think. And this was in one of the plazas in Torino. And this was ski jumping, and I actually had the night off, but I wanted to shoot ski jumping, and the paper wasn't interested, so I just went. And it was like the only time I actually got to play and just have fun. I didn't have to worry about the winners. I didn't have to, follow the Americans around. So it was really fun just kind of, just doing whatever I wanted. So I did this whole kind of series of ski jumping where I just kind of progressively made the shutter speed slower and slower just to see what would happen. And it was like this really kind of cool, almost like metamorphosis from sharpness to... They became like more and more abstract, and this one looked like some slinky head or something. Thanks. But that was fun. I really enjoyed doing that. That was like my favorite night. And then my third Olympics I shot Beijing in 2008, and this was outside the water cube where Michael Phelps won all his gold medals, and There were just some black sedans parked out front, and so this is just the water cube reflected on the hood and trunk of a car. But this kind of goes back to my art background, I think, where I'm always looking more for design type things. And then I was lucky enough to shoot all 8 of Michael Phelps's gold-winning medal races. And then, it was a challenge of finding different angles. Like, the end of the pool angle was great, except there was this big white rope right through the middle of it. So some people had, like, great photos with this white rope right through the middle of Phelps's eyes. So you'd, like, be, like, as low as you could get. And I think I made, like, maybe one different photo, and it was this one. It was after Michael Phelps would win a gold medal, he would throw the bouquet up to his mom, wherever she was. And after gold medal 6, I happened to be sitting right by his mom. So right before he came by, I kind of went and shot over her shoulder as the bouquet was coming up. So that was like my one different photo. And so, well, that's all I have. So I appreciate it. That was a lot of photos. So.